Scott Morales steps onto the alien soil of the Saurian homeworld, his heart racing with a mix of anticipation and dread. The human diplomat's mission is clear: negotiate peace with the reptilian race that has been humanity's adversary for decades. As he walks towards the imposing structure where the talks will take place, Scott's eyes are drawn to a striking Saurian female approaching him. Her elongated, spiraled horns catch the light of the planet's twin suns, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Scott's breath catches in his throat as she introduces herself as Rosa, his assigned liaison for the duration of the negotiations. Her scales shimmer with an iridescent quality, and her reptilian eyes regard him with a mix of caution and curiosity. "Welcome to our world, Diplomat Morales," Rosa says, her voice carrying a slight hiss. "I hope your journey was uneventful." Scott nods, still captivated by her appearance. Without thinking, he blurts out, "You're quite horny, aren't you?" The moment the words leave his mouth, Scott realizes his grave error. Rosa's expression shifts from welcoming to confused, her head tilting to one side. "I do not understand this term, horny. Is this a human greeting?" Scott's face flushes red as he scrambles to explain. "No, I meant your horns are very prominent. It's just an Earth expression, but it's not. I shouldn't have." The atmosphere around them grows tense as Scott fumbles for words. Nearby, a group of Saurian elders observes the interaction, their scaled faces contorting with visible agitation. Scott's mind races, knowing that this cultural misstep could derail the peace talks before they even begin. In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, Scott takes a deep breath and addresses both Rosa and the elders. "I apologize for my inappropriate comment. It's clear that our cultures have much to learn from each other. Perhaps we could use this misunderstanding as an opportunity to bridge the gap between our species." The elders exchange glances, their forked tongues flicking out in what Scott assumes is a sign of deliberation. After a moment that feels like an eternity, one of them steps forward. "Explain yourself, human," the elder demands, voice low and gravelly. Scott straightens his posture, mustering all the diplomatic skills at his disposal. "I propose we implement a cultural exchange program as part of our peace negotiations. By learning more about each other's languages, customs, and social norms, we can prevent future misunderstandings and foster better relations between our species." The Saurian elders confer among themselves, their scaled tails swishing back and forth. Finally, the lead elder turns to Scott. "We cautiously agree to your proposal, Diplomat Morales. However, be warned that any further insults or misunderstandings will have severe consequences for these talks and for you personally." Scott nods solemnly, relief washing over him. As the elders retreat, he turns back to Rosa, who has been watching the exchange with keen interest. To his surprise, her reptilian eyes now gleam with curiosity. "I volunteer to be your personal guide during your stay, Diplomat Morales," Rosa says, her voice carrying a hint of excitement. "I find myself intrigued by your quick thinking and eager to learn more about humans." As they walk together towards the negotiation chambers, Scott can't help but wonder if this unexpected turn of events might lead to more than just diplomatic relations between their species. The peace talks have barely begun, and already the lines between professional and personal boundaries are starting to blur in ways he never anticipated. As Scott and Rosa made their way towards the negotiation chambers, the human diplomat couldn't shake the feeling that his journey on this alien world was about to take an unexpected turn. Little did he know just how right he was. The next morning, Rosa arrived at Scott's quarters, her scales gleaming in the light of Zalthoria's twin suns. "Are you ready to begin our cultural exchange, Diplomat Morales?" she asked, her forked tongue flicking out briefly. Scott nodded, eager to start. "Lead the way, Rosa. I'm looking forward to learning more about your world." They set out into the bustling streets of Zalthoria, the capital city of the Saurian homeworld. Scott's eyes widened as he took in the intricate architecture surrounding them. The buildings seemed to twist and curve, accommodating the Saurians' unique physiology. "Our structures are designed to complement our natural agility," Rosa explained, noting Scott's fascination. "See how the walkways spiral upwards? It allows for easy climbing and perching. As they continued their tour, Rosa pointed out various landmarks, each with its own rich history. Scott listened intently, amazed by the depth of Saurian culture. However, their peaceful exploration was soon interrupted by a group of young Saurian males approaching them with obvious hostility. One of them, a muscular Saurian with particularly sharp horns, stepped forward aggressively. "What's this human doing here?" he hissed, his eyes narrowing at Scott. Rosa quickly moved between them. "Stand down, Zax," she said firmly. "He's here as a diplomat. We're working towards peace." Scott's heart raced as he realized the depth of animosity some Saurians still held towards humans. He watched as Rosa and Zax engaged in a tense exchange, their tails swishing agitatedly. "You're taking this alien on a tour of our sacred city?" Zax spat. "Have you forgotten what his kind did to us?" Rosa's scales seemed to darken slightly. "I haven't forgotten anything, Zax, but we must move forward if we want a better future for both our species." As the confrontation de-escalated, Scott noticed the way Rosa and Zax looked at each other. There was history there, unspoken but palpable. Once Zax and his group had left, Rosa turned to Scott with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry about that. He's my former mate. Our relationship ended when I chose to support peace with humans." Scott nodded, understanding the personal cost of their diplomatic efforts. "Thank you for standing up for me, Rosa. I know this can't be easy for you." As night fell over Zalthoria, Rosa led Scott to a grand hall illuminated by bioluminescent plants. "We're having a traditional Saurian feast in your honor," she explained. The hall was filled with Saurian dignitaries, their scales shimmering in the otherworldly light. Scott found himself seated at a long table, staring at plates filled with live insects and raw meat. He swallowed hard, determined not to offend his hosts. Rosa watched with amusement as Scott struggled to eat politely. "Try the glowworms," she suggested, her eyes twinkling. "They're considered a delicacy." Scott gingerly picked up a squirming, luminescent worm and popped it into his mouth. The burst of flavor surprised him, tangy and sweet with an unexpected crunch. Rosa laughed at his expression, a sound that made Scott's heart skip a beat. As the feast progressed, Scott learned about Saurian mating rituals. Rosa explained how males would engage in elaborate horn displays and tests of strength to attract potential mates. Scott found himself wondering how he would fare in such contests. After the feast, Rosa led Scott to a secluded area outside the city. "We have one more important custom to observe," she said. "As a visiting diplomat, you're invited to participate in our cleansing ritual at the sacred hot springs." They arrived at a steaming pool surrounded by glowing crystals. Rosa began to remove her ceremonial garments, revealing her sleek, scaled body. Scott hesitated, suddenly very aware of their differences. "Don't be shy, Diplomat Morales," Rosa said, her voice softer than usual. "This is a normal part of our culture." As they entered the hot spring, Scott couldn't help but admire Rosa's alien beauty. Her scales shimmered in the moonlight, and her lithe form moved with a grace that seemed almost hypnotic. To his surprise, he noticed Rosa studying him with equal fascination, her clawed fingers gently tracing the smooth skin of his arm. "Your lack of scales is intriguing," she murmured. "And your hornless head, it's so different from what I'm used to." Their eyes met, and Scott felt a spark of connection that transcended their species differences. As they soaked in the warm water, their conversation deepened, exploring the intricacies of their respective cultures, approaches to relationships, and intimacy. "Saurians form strong pair bonds," Rosa explained, "but we're generally more open about physical affection than humans seem to be." Scott nodded, considering this new information. "I think humans could learn a lot from your openness," he said, feeling a new warmth that had nothing to do with the hot spring. Suddenly, a piercing alarm shattered the peaceful moment. Rosa's head snapped up, her eyes widening with fear. "That's the city's defense alarm," she hissed. "We need to go. Now!" As they scrambled out of the hot spring and hurriedly dressed, Rosa explained the situation. "A Zalthrian sandworm has breached our outer defenses. They're massive predators that occasionally attack our settlements." Scott's mind raced as they sprinted back towards the city, The peaceful diplomatic mission had suddenly turned into a fight for survival. As they reached the city limits, he saw Saurian military forces mobilizing, their advanced weapons gleaming in the moonlight. A commanding officer approached Rosa, speaking rapidly in their native tongue. Rosa turned to Scott, her expression grave. "I have to join the front lines. It's my duty." Before Scott could respond, Rosa pulled him into a fierce embrace. The sudden intimacy caught them both off guard, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Then Rosa was gone, running towards the sounds of battle. Left alone in the chaos, Scott looked around frantically, trying to find a way to help. He spotted a group of civilian Saurians struggling with a large, unfamiliar device. As he approached, he recognized it as some kind of force field generator. Drawing on his diplomatic skills, Scott approached the group. "Can I help?" he asked, gesturing towards the machine. The Saurians looked at him skeptically, but as the ground began to shake with the approaching threat, they nodded in agreement. Scott threw himself into the task, working alongside the Saurians to decipher the complex controls. As the roars of the Zolthrian sandworm grew louder, Scott felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The success of the peace talks, the safety of the city, and his budding relationship with Rosa all hung in the balance. With restored dedication, he focused on the task at hand, knowing that his actions in the next few moments could change everything. The course of interspecies relations forever. With renewed drive, Scott input the final sequence into the force field generator. A brilliant blue light erupted from the device, expanding rapidly outward. The energy barrier encased the city in a protective dome, just as the ground began to quake violently. Scott watched in awe as the massive Zolthrian sandworm collided with the force field, its enormous body slamming against the shimmering barrier with a thunderous impact that sent tremors through the earth. The Saurian civilians around Scott chittered excitedly, their scaled faces a mix of relief and admiration. One of them, an elderly female with intricate horn patterns, approached Scott. "You've saved us, human," she said, her forked tongue flicking out between words. "Perhaps there is more to your kind than we realized." Scott nodded gratefully, but his thoughts were already racing ahead. The force field would hold for now, but they needed a more permanent solution. Without hesitation, he sprinted towards the sounds of battle, his heart pounding with each step. As he reached the city's outer defenses, Scott spotted Rosa amidst the chaos. She wielded an energy lance with deadly precision, its crackling blue tip leaving scorch marks on the sandworm's thick hide. The creature's massive body undulated against the force field, each impact sending shockwaves through the barrier. Scott's eyes darted around the battlefield until they landed on a fallen Saurian soldier. Beside the motionless form lay an alien weapon, its design unfamiliar but purpose clear. Scott scooped up the device, feeling its weight and studying its controls for a brief moment before joining the fray. "Rosa!" he called out, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. She turned, surprise flashing across her reptilian features as she saw Scott armed and ready. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, ducking as a piece of debris flew overhead. "Helping?" Scott replied simply, raising the weapon and firing. A burst of energy erupted from the barrel, striking the sandworm and eliciting a shriek of pain. The creature's attacks intensified, its massive body slamming against the force field with renewed vigor. For hours, Scott and Rosa fought side by side. Despite his unfamiliarity with Saurian technology, Scott's military training served him well. He quickly adapted to the weapon's unique recoil and targeting system, providing effective support to the defenders. During a brief lull in the assault, Rosa pulled Scott behind a crumbling wall. Her scales glistened with exertion, and her breath came in short pants. "The sandworm is drawn to our power sources," she explained hurriedly. "We need to lure it away from the city, or the force field will eventually fail." Scott's mind raced, processing the new information. An idea began to form, dangerous but potentially effective. "What if we use a mobile energy generator as bait?" he suggested. "We could draw it away from the city entirely." Rosa's eyes widened, her pupils dilating with a mix of surprise and admiration. "That could work," she said slowly. "But it would be incredibly risky. The sandworm would pursue the energy source relentlessly." "I'll do it," Scott said without hesitation. "I can pilot the vehicle carrying the generator." Rosa opened her mouth to protest, but was interrupted by the arrival of a group of Saurian military leaders. She quickly explained Scott's plan, vouching for his ingenuity when the officers expressed skepticism. After a tense discussion, the Saurian leadership agreed to the plan. As preparations began, Rosa turned to Scott, her expression unreadable. "I'm coming with you," she stated firmly. "You'll need a co-pilot who knows the terrain." Their eyes met, and Scott felt a surge of emotion he couldn't quite name. The stakes of their mission suddenly seemed to extend far beyond the fate of the city. With a nod, he accepted her offer. Within the hour, Scott and Rosa found themselves aboard a specially modified vehicle, a fusion of Saurian and human technology. The energy generator hummed behind them, its power barely suppressed. As the force field lowered to allow their exit, Scott gripped the controls tightly, acutely aware of Rosa's presence beside him. The instant they cleared the barrier, the sandworm's attention snapped to their vehicle. Its massive body began to move, creating waves in the sandy terrain as it gave chase. Scott gunned the engine, and their desperate race began. The alien landscape blurred around them as Scott pushed the vehicle to its limits. Rosa managed the energy output, creating a trail that kept the sandworm interested without overtaxing their systems. Each obstacle they overcame together seemed to strengthen the bond between them, their movements becoming increasingly synchronized. Miles from the city, they reached the designated point where they planned to disable the energy source and escape. Scott's hands flew over the controls, initiating the shutdown sequence. But instead of powering down, the generator's hum intensified. "It's malfunctioning!" Rosa shouted, her claws frantically working to override the system. "We can't shut it down!" The sandworm's roar filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Scott's mind raced, evaluating their options in split seconds. His eyes landed on a deep ravine ahead, and he made a split-second decision. "Hold on!" he yelled, veering the vehicle toward the chasm. Rosa's eyes widened in understanding, and she braced herself for impact. As they hurtled toward the ravine's edge, Rosa suddenly reached out, pulling Scott into a fierce embrace. Their bodies pressed close in the cramped cockpit, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Then they were airborne, the vehicle plummeting into the depths of the ravine. The impact was violent, metal screaming as it twisted and tore. Scott's world spun, pain blossoming across his body. Through the haze, he registered Rosa's form next to him, and instinct took over. Ignoring his own injuries, Scott threw himself over Rosa, shielding her from a cascade of falling debris. He felt the impact of rocks and metal against his back, each blow sending shockwaves of pain through his body. But Rosa remained unharmed beneath him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something deeper. As the dust settled, they realized the gambit had worked. The energy source lay destroyed amidst the wreckage, and the sandworm's roars grew distant as it lost interest and burrowed back into the ground. Battered but alive, Scott and Rosa extracted themselves from the twisted metal. They stood together on the ravine floor, the enormity of their survival washing over them. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by an acute awareness of each other's presence. Rosa's gaze met Scott's, her eyes filled with an intensity that made his heart race. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken emotions and possibilities. But before either could speak, the sound of approaching Saurian rescue vehicles filled the air. As they waited for extraction, Scott and Rosa remained close, their bodies gravitating toward each other almost unconsciously. The shared ordeal had transformed their relationship into something neither had anticipated. The implications of this change hung unspoken between them, adding a new layer of complexity to their already complicated situation. The rescue team arrived, their expressions a mix of awe and relief. As Scott and Rosa boarded the vehicle for the journey back to the city, Scott couldn't help but notice the change in Rosa's demeanor. Her movements seemed more fluid, almost sensual, and she found subtle ways to maintain physical contact with him. This new dynamic sent a thrill through Scott, but it also filled him with uncertainty. As they approached the gleaming spires of the Saurian capital, he realized that their actions today would have far-reaching consequences, not just for human-Saurian relations, but for their personal lives as well. The rescue team informed them that they were being taken directly to the Saurian High Council. Scott straightened his posture, knowing that the next few hours would be crucial. Beside him, Rosa's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the city grew larger on the horizon, Scott's mind raced with the possibilities and pitfalls that awaited them. The fate of two species hung in the balance, but so did the future of a relationship that had grown far beyond the bounds of diplomacy. With Rosa by his side, Scott prepared himself for the next phase of their journey, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. As the rescue vehicle touched down in the heart of the Saurian capital, Scott and Rosa exchanged a meaningful glance. Their intertwined fingers reluctantly separated as they prepared to face the consequences of their actions. A group of stern-faced Saurian officials approached, their elaborate horn decorations gleaming in the fading light. "The High Council demands your immediate presence," one of them announced, his forked tongue flicking nervously. Scott straightened his posture, acutely aware of the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Rosa stood tall beside him, her scales shimmering with an iridescent sheen that caught Scott's eye. Together, they followed the officials through winding corridors of polished stone and bioluminescent flora. The High Council chambers loomed before them, a cavernous space adorned with intricate murals depicting Saurian history. As the massive doors swung open, Scott felt a wave of tension wash over him. The chamber was filled with male Saurians, their horns more elaborate and imposing than any Scott had seen before. "Ambassador Scott, step forward," commanded a deep, resonant voice from the center of the room. Scott complied, feeling the weight of dozens of reptilian eyes upon him. For the next hour, Scott presented a detailed account of their mission to save the city from the Valorian sandworm. He emphasized the successful collaboration between humans and Saurians, his words measured and diplomatic. As he spoke, he couldn't help but notice the agitation rippling through the council members. "While we appreciate your assistance," one council member hissed, his scales dripping, "we must question the wisdom of involving humans in Saurian affairs." Before Scott could respond, Rosa stepped forward, her eyes blazing with intensity. "Honored members of the High Council," she began, her voice strong and clear, "I stand before you, not just as a fellow Saurian, but as a witness to extraordinary bravery and quick thinking." Scott watched in awe as Rosa passionately defended his actions, her words painting a vivid picture of their harrowing experience. Her tale swished with emphasis as she spoke, and Scott found himself captivated by the graceful movement. The council chamber erupted into heated debate, with some members swayed by Rosa's impassioned speech, while others remained skeptical. The air crackled with tension as arguments flew back and forth. Suddenly, the chamber doors burst open, revealing a familiar face that made Scott's stomach clench. Zax, Rosa's former partner, strode in with an air of arrogance that set Scott's teeth on edge. "Esteemed council members," Zax announced, his voice dripping with disdain, "I must caution against trusting the words of this human." He spat the last word as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. "How do we know this sandworm attack wasn't orchestrated to gain favor with our people?" The accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Scott felt a surge of anger coursing through him, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Council members," he said, his voice steady, "I assure you that my actions, and those of the human diplomatic mission, have been nothing but sincere. We seek only to build a lasting peace between our species." As Scott defended himself, he noticed Rosa's gaze fixed upon him, her expression a mix of admiration and something deeper that made his heart race. The debate intensified, with council members taking sides and voices rising in volume. Just as the argument reached a fever pitch, a piercing alarm cut through the chamber. Screens flickered to life around the room, displaying a series of maps dotted with pulsing red markers. "Multiple Zolthrian sandworm sightings reported near colonies across the planet," a technician announced, his voice tight with fear. The chamber fell silent as the implication sank in. The recent attack hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of something much larger and more terrifying. The head of the council, a wizened Saurian with intricate horn patterns, leaned forward. "It seems," he said slowly, "that we find ourselves in need of assistance after all." His gaze swept across the room before settling on Scott and Rosa. We propose a joint human-Saurian task force to address this crisis. Ambassador Scott, Lieutenant Rosa, you will be key members of this initiative. As the council hurriedly discussed the details of this new alliance, Scott felt a mix of relief and trepidation wash over him. He glanced at Rosa, who returned his look with a small smile that sent a shiver down his spine. With the emergency session concluded, Scott and Rosa were escorted to their newly assigned quarters in the diplomatic wing. The shared living space was a blend of Saurian and human design elements, creating an environment that felt both alien and familiar. As the door closed behind them, leaving them alone for the first time since their harrowing escape, the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Rosa moved closer, her scales catching the light in a mesmerizing pattern. "Scott," she said softly, her voice sending a thrill through him, "there's something I need to show you about Saurian customs." She reached up, her claws gently brushing against her horns in a deliberate motion. Scott watched transfixed as Rosa began to demonstrate what he would soon learn were subtle Saurian courtship behaviors. The intimacy of the moment was palpable, leaving him both exhilarated and unsure of how to respond. As night fell outside their window, casting the room in a soft, alien glow, Scott realized that their relationship had irrevocably changed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, be it rogue sandworms or interspecies prejudice, they would face them together, navigating the complex waters of diplomacy, duty, and their growing attraction. Attraction. The air between them felt charged with a new energy, one that both excited and terrified Scott. As they entered their shared living space, Scott's heart raced. The room seemed smaller, more intimate than before. Rosa moved with a fluid grace that captivated him, her scales shimmering in the soft light. "I should probably get ready for bed," Scott said, his voice slightly strained. He grabbed his sleepwear and headed towards the bathroom, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. What happened next was purely accidental. Scott, lost in thought about the day's events and his growing feelings for Rosa, absent-mindedly opened the bathroom door without knocking. He froze, eyes widening at the sight before him. Rosa stood there, engaged in what appeared to be an intricate Saurian grooming ritual. Her scales glistened with a sheen of oil, and she was carefully running her claws along the ridges of her horns. The vulnerability of the moment struck Scott, and he felt a surge of heat rush through his body. "I'm so sorry," Scott stammered, but found himself unable to look away. Rosa's eyes locked onto his, and he saw something primal flicker in their depths. "Scott," Rosa said, her voice low and husky. She made no move to cover herself, instead taking a step towards him. "There's no need to apologize. Perhaps this was meant to happen." The tension between them snapped. Scott moved forward, drawn by an irresistible force. His hand reached out, hesitating for a moment before gently touching Rosa's arm. The texture of her scales was unlike anything he had felt before, smooth yet textured, cool yet radiating a subtle warmth. Rosa's breath hitched at his touch. Her own hand came up, claws delicately tracing the contours of Scott's face. "Your skin," she murmured. "It's so different from ours. So soft." Their exploration was tentative at first, both of them marveling at the alien nature of the other's body. Scott's fingers skimmed over the ridges of Rosa's horns, eliciting a soft gasp from her. In turn, Rosa's tail curled around Scott's leg, the sensation sending shivers up his spine. As their touches grew bolder, the air seemed to thicken around them. Scott leaned in, drawn by an instinct he couldn't explain. Rosa tilted her head, her eyes half-lidded. A harsh beeping shattered the moment. They jumped apart, reality crashing back in. The communication panel on the wall was flashing urgently. "Emergency transmission from the High Council," the automated voice announced. Scott and Rosa exchanged a look, a mix of frustration and concern. Whatever was happening, it had to be serious for the council to contact them at this hour. They quickly made themselves presentable and hurried to the council chambers. The usual pomp and ceremony were absent. Instead, they were greeted by grim-faced Saurians huddled around holographic displays. Ambassador Scott, Lieutenant Rosa, the head counselor, acknowledged them. We have a crisis on our hands. Zax has escalated his protests into full-scale riots. His followers have stormed a human diplomatic outpost on the city's outskirts. Scott felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Are there casualties? Not yet, another counselor replied. But they've taken hostages. Several human diplomats are being held inside the compound. Rosa hissed softly, her tail lashing in agitation. This is madness. Doesn't Zax realize he's endangering everything we've worked for? The head counselor nodded gravely. Which is why we're sending you two to negotiate. You've both proven your ability to bridge our cultures. If anyone can defuse this situation peacefully, it's you. As Scott and Rosa absorbed this information, a junior technician burst into the chamber. Counselors, we're detecting increased seismic activity near the outpost. Signs consistent with Valorian sandworm movement. The room erupted into frantic activity. The head counselor raised his voice over the commotion. This changes everything. Ambassador, Lieutenant, we're equipping you with a prototype sonic disruptor. It's designed to repel the sandworms, but it's untested in the field. Use it only as a last resort. Scott nodded, acutely aware of the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He glanced at Rosa, seeing his own persistence mirrored in her eyes. Despite the chaos around them, he felt a moment of connection, a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose. As they hurried to the waiting transport vehicle, Scott couldn't help but reflect on how quickly things had changed. Just moments ago, they had been on the cusp of something intimate and profound. Now they were racing towards danger, the fate of two species potentially hanging in the balance. The transport lifted off, carrying them towards the besieged outpost. In the cramped confines of the vehicle, Scott was acutely aware of Rosa's presence beside him. The memory of their interrupted encounter lingered, adding an extra layer of tension to an already fraught situation. Rosa's tail brushed against Scott's leg. Whether by accident or design, he couldn't tell. He looked at her, seeing the same mix of emotions he felt reflected in her eyes. Perseverance, fear, and something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. As the outpost came into view, Scott took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Whatever challenges they faced, rioters, sandworms, or their own complicated feelings, he knew one thing for certain. He and Rosa would face them together. Together, united in their determination to overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead. As they approached the outpost, Scott's mind raced with strategies. The situation was precarious: human hostages, Saurian rioters, and the looming threat of Valorian sandworms. He glanced at Rosa, drawing strength from her presence. "We need a plan," he said, his voice steady despite the tension. "If we can get Zax to listen to reason—" A violent tremor shook the transport, cutting off Scott's words. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Seismic activity increasing. Sandworm approaching fast." Rosa's tail coiled tightly around her seat. "We'll have to deal with Zax and the sandworm simultaneously," she hissed, her eyes narrowing with focus. The transport touched down a safe distance from the outpost. Scott and Rosa disembarked, the prototype sonic disruptor clutched in Scott's hands. They could see the rioters gathered around the building, their agitated voices carrying on the hot desert wind. As they approached, a familiar figure detached itself from the crowd. Zax strode towards them, his scales gleaming with sweat and sand. "Come to negotiate, have you?" he sneered, his gaze flicking between Scott and Rosa. "Or perhaps to demonstrate more of your human heroics?" Before Scott could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A massive, segmented form burst from the sand nearby, towering over the outpost. The Valorian sandworm had arrived. Chaos erupted. Rioters scattered, their anger forgotten in the face of this new threat. Scott raised the sonic disruptor, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Wait!" Rosa's hand on his arm stopped him. "If we use it now, we might drive the worm towards the outpost." She was right. Scott lowered the device, his mind racing for an alternative. In that moment of hesitation, he saw something in Zax's eyes. Not the arrogance or disdain he'd come to expect, but fear. Fear and a flicker of something else. Recognition. "Zax!" Scott called out, an idea forming. "You know something about these creatures, don't you? Something from Saurian history?" Zax's head snapped towards Scott, surprise evident on his features. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen in a tableau of understanding, even as chaos swirled around them. The next hours passed in a blur of action. With Zax's reluctant assistance, they managed to use the sonic disruptor to guide the sandworm away from the outpost. The hostages were freed, and the riot quelled. As the dust settled, Scott found himself standing before the Saurian High Council once again, this time with both Rosa and Zax at his side. The head counselor's expression was a mix of relief and curiosity. "You've done well," he said, his gaze sweeping over the unlikely trio. "But it seems there's more to this situation than we realized." Zax stepped forward, his usual bravado tempered by the gravity of recent events. "There is, honored counselor," he said. "An ancient text speaks of a time when our people lived in harmony with the sandworms. I believe we've been approaching this all wrong." The council chamber erupted in murmurs. Scott felt a surge of excitement coursing through him. This was it, a chance to turn crisis into opportunity, to forge a deeper understanding between their species. As the council deliberated, Scott became acutely aware of Rosa's presence beside him. The events of the past day, from their intimate moment in their quarters to their shared triumph in the field, had fundamentally shifted something between them. He longed to speak with her privately, to explore this new dimension of their relationship. But duty called. The head counselor's voice cut through Scott's thoughts. "Ambassador Scott, Lieutenant Rosa," he announced, "in light of your exceptional service, we are appointing you as co-leaders of a new task force. Your mission will be to combat the Zolthrian sandworm threat and explore the historical connection Zax has uncovered." Scott and Rosa exchanged glances, a mix of pride and trepidation reflected in their eyes. This new responsibility would bring them closer together, both professionally and personally. The challenges ahead were daunting, but as Scott looked at Rosa, he knew they would face them as one. In the days that followed, Scott and Rosa threw themselves into their new roles. They established a joint research facility on the outskirts of the Saurian capital, a place where human and Saurian scientists worked side by side to unravel the mysteries of the sandworms. Their shared quarters became a sanctuary, a place where they could shed the weight of their public personas and explore the growing intimacy between them. Scott marveled at the unexpected compatibility of their bodies, the way Rosa's scales felt against his skin, the gentle scrape of her claws along his back. One evening, as they lay entwined, Rosa's tail curled possessively around Scott's leg. She spoke softly. "We should test the new disruptor soon," she said, her breath warm against his neck. "The desert near the Crimson Cliffs would be ideal." Scott nodded, his fingers tracing the elegant curve of her horns. "Agreed. We'll organize a field test as soon as possible." The test, when it came, exceeded all expectations. The advanced sonic disruptor repelled a group of approaching sandworms without harming them, its effectiveness drawing excited chatter from the observing scientists. As word of their success spread, Scott and Rosa found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Their images were broadcast across both human and Saurian worlds, hailed as symbols of interspecies cooperation. Amidst the whirlwind of media attention and increased responsibilities, Zax approached them with news that would change everything. "I've found something," he said, his voice low and urgent. "An ancient text that speaks of a lost city in the deep desert. It may hold the key to understanding the sandworms." Scott and Rosa exchanged glances, the implications clear. This could be the breakthrough they'd been searching for. As they began preparations for an expedition into the heart of the Saurian desert, Scott couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something monumental. The night before their departure, as they made final checks on their equipment, Scott pulled Rosa aside. In the privacy of their quarters, he cupped her face gently, marveling at the play of light across her scales. "Whatever we find out there," he said softly, "whatever challenges we face them together." Rosa's eyes shimmered with emotion. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against his in a gesture of deep Saurian affection. "Together," she agreed. As dawn broke over the Saurian capital, Scott and Rosa boarded the lead vehicle of their expedition. The vast desert stretched before them, mysterious and foreboding. They exchanged a determined look, ready to uncover the secrets hidden beneath the sands, their intertwined fates now bound to the future of both their species. As the first rays of sunlight crested the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and gold, Scott and Rosa exchanged a look of quiet dedication. The vast expanse of the Saurian desert stretched before them, an ocean of sand hiding ancient secrets beneath its shifting dunes. The convoy of vehicles rumbled to life, kicking up plumes of dust as they set out into the unforgiving landscape. Scott and Rosa took point in the lead vehicle, a specially modified sandcrawler equipped with the latest in human and Saurian technology. The gentle hum of the engines was soon drowned out by the howling desert winds. As they pressed deeper into the desert, the frequency of sandworm activity increased dramatically. The ground beneath them trembled with increasing regularity, forcing the team to rely heavily on their newly developed sonic disruptors. "Another contact! 2 o'clock!" Rosa called out, her eyes fixed on the sensor display. Scott reacted instantly, activating the disruptor mounted on their vehicle. A low-frequency pulse rippled through the air, invisible but palpable. Moments later, a massive form breached the surface of the sand, its segmented body writhing in agitation before retreating back into the depths. The journey proved to be a grueling test of endurance. Temperatures soared to unbearable levels during the day, only to plummet at night. Violent sandstorms whipped across their path, reducing visibility to near zero and forcing the convoy to hunker down for hours at a time. On the 5th day of their expedition, as they crested a particularly large dune, Zax's voice crackled over the comm system. "There! To the southeast!" All eyes turned to where he was pointing. At first, Scott saw nothing but more endless sand. Then, as if by magic, a shimmer in the air revealed the outline of a massive structure, mostly buried beneath the dune. "That's it," Rosa breathed, her eyes wide with excitement. "The lost city." The team sprang into action, deploying a combination of human excavation drones and Saurian archaeosensors to clear a path to the ancient entrance. As the last of the sand was cleared away, a massive stone doorway stood revealed, covered in intricate carvings that seemed to glow faintly in the harsh desert light. "Incredible," Zax murmured, running his clawed hand over the symbols. "This dialect, it's unlike anything I've ever seen." With a series of heavy clicks and the groan of stone against stone, the doorway began to open. Cool, stale air rushed out to meet them, carrying with it the musty scent of ages past. Scott and Rosa exchanged a glance before stepping forward, leading their team into the darkness. As they descended into the depths of the city, emergency force fields sprang to life behind them, sealing off the entrance and preventing the ever-shifting sand from collapsing their only way out. The beams of their flashlights danced across walls covered in strange, glowing symbols and intricate murals depicting scenes of a long-forgotten era. The team split into 2 groups, with Scott leading one and Rosa the other. Zax accompanied Rosa, his expertise in ancient dialects proving invaluable as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors. They maintained constant communication through their linked devices, voices echoing through the vast network of tunnels and chambers. Scott's team pushed deeper into the heart of the city, marveling at the advanced technology that surrounded them. Despite millennia of abandonment, many systems still hummed with life, responding to their presence with flickering lights and holographic displays. Their explorations led them to a massive chamber that seemed to pulse with hidden energy. As they entered, consoles sprang to life, bathing the room in a soft blue glow. Holographic displays materialized in the air, showing detailed schematics of the sandworms and complex biological data. "This is incredible," one of the human scientists breathed, her fingers dancing over a control panel. "It looks like the sandworms were bioengineered, some kind of planetary defense system." Meanwhile, Rosa's team made a discovery of their own. In a separate chamber, they found a series of stasis pods, their surfaces frosted over with age. As they approached, the pods began to hum, internal systems reactivating after eons of dormancy. "By the first egg," Zax gasped, peering into one of the pods. "There are saurians inside, perfectly preserved." Rosa's tail lashed with excitement and trepidation. "We need to revive one of them. The knowledge they could provide—" Zax's scales rippled with unease. "Are you certain that's wise? We have no idea how they might react to our presence. After a brief debate, the decision was made. With trembling hands, Rosa initiated the revival sequence on one of the pods. Steam hissed from vents as the ancient machinery whirred to life. The pod's surface cleared, revealing the form of a female saurian within. With a final beep, the pod opened. The ancient saurian's eyes fluttered open, confusion quickly giving way to shock as she took in her surroundings. Rosa stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Welcome back," she said in Saurian. "I am Lieutenant Rosa. You've been in stasis for a very long time." The ancient saurian's gaze darted around the chamber before settling on Rosa. When she spoke, her voice was raspy from disuse. "I am Zelana. How long?" As Rosa began to explain their presence and the passage of time, Scott's voice crackled over the comm system. "Rosa, we've made a breakthrough. The sandworms. They were never meant to be permanent. There's a failsafe in their genetic code, but it's malfunctioned." Zelana's head snapped up at this, her eyes widening. "The failsafe? Yes, I remember. We can reactivate it, but it will require a massive amount of energy and a direct neural interface." Scott's voice came through again, tension evident in his tone. "We've found what looks like a control center. If we can reactivate the systems here, we might be able to broadcast the signal." As the two teams converged on the control center, the ground began to shake violently. The energy emissions from the reactivated systems had not gone unnoticed. A swarm of sandworms, drawn by the ancient power signature, began to converge on the underground city. "We're running out of time," Scott said, his eyes meeting Rosa's across the control room. "The neural interface. It needs both a human and a saurian to synchronize the signal." Without hesitation, they stepped forward. As they were connected to the ancient machinery, their minds began to merge not just with the technology, but with each other. Memories, emotions, and sensations flowed between them in a torrent of shared consciousness. Outside, the city's defenses strained against the onslaught of the sandworms. Zax organized a desperate defense, coordinating the team's efforts to hold back the creatures, while Scott and Rosa completed the activation sequence. In the control room, Scott and Rosa stood motionless, their bodies rigid as waves of energy pulsed through them. Their minds raced through a landscape of shared experiences and emotions, each revelation bringing them closer together, even as the strain threatened to tear them apart. As the final sequence initiated, a massive sandworm breached the outer defenses. Zax and the others fought with everything they had, knowing that failure now would mean the end of everything they had worked for. With a final surge of willpower, Scott and Rosa completed the sequence. A pulse of energy erupted from the control center, radiating outward through the planet. The sandworms froze, their frenzied attacks ceasing as the failsafe signal took hold. Slowly, painfully, Scott and Rosa disconnected from the interface. They collapsed into each other's arms, physically and emotionally drained, but triumphant. Around them, the ancient city hummed with renewed purpose, its systems fully awakened for the first time in millennia. As the team began to secure the city and its vast stores of knowledge, Scott and Rosa found a moment of privacy. No words were needed. Their shared experience in the neural interface had forged a bond deeper than any they could have imagined. They stood together, looking out over the awakened city, the weight of their discovery settling upon them. The implications for both their species were staggering, promising a future of unprecedented cooperation and understanding. What they didn't know, what none of them could have anticipated, was that the reactivation of the ancient systems had triggered something else. Deep within the city's core, a long-dormant beacon had sprung to life, sending a signal racing out into the depths of space, a signal that could change everything. Everything they thought they knew about the universe. As the ancient city's systems powered down, Scott and Rosa led their team back to the surface. The journey upward was filled with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, each step carrying the weight of their monumental discovery. When they finally emerged from the underground complex, they were met with a sight that took their breath away. The endless sea of sand that had greeted them upon their arrival had transformed. Where once there was only barren desert, now the landscape teemed with life. Sandworms glided gracefully through the dunes, their movements smooth and purposeful, no longer driven by mindless aggression. "It's incredible," Rosa whispered, her scales shimmering in the harsh sunlight. "They're peaceful." Scott nodded, still struggling to process the magnitude of what they had accomplished. "The fail-safe worked better than we could have hoped. They're no longer a threat." As they made their way back to the Saurian capital, news of their success spread like wildfire. The convoy was met with cheering crowds of both humans and Saurians, their voices raised in celebration of a new era of cooperation. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Scott and Rosa found themselves at the center of a political storm as the Saurian High Council and human leadership scrambled to capitalize on their discovery. A joint committee was quickly established to study and implement the ancient technology, with Scott and Rosa appointed as key advisors. Their first major project focused on integrating the now docile sandworms into Saurian society. Under their guidance, a series of controlled experiments began, using the ancient control systems to direct the massive creatures for constructive purposes. "Initiate tunneling sequence," Scott called out, his hand hovering over the control panel. Rosa stood beside him, her clawed fingers dancing across a holographic display. With a low rumble, a sandworm emerged from the sand, its segmented body undulating as it moved. Following the signals from the control system, it began to burrow into the ground, carving out a perfect tunnel for a new transportation network. As they worked, Scott and Rosa found their connection deepening. The neural interface experience had left an indelible mark on their relationship, allowing them to work in perfect synchronization. Their movements mirrored each other, their thoughts seeming to flow as one. This heightened connection did not go unnoticed. Zax, who had been appointed as head of security for the project, watched them with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You two have become quite the team," he remarked one evening as they reviewed the day's progress. Rosa's tail twitched nervously. "We work well together," she said, her eyes meeting Scott's briefly before darting away. The unspoken nature of their bond became a subject of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. Conservative factions on both sides began to voice concerns about the implications of such a close human-Saurian partnership. Despite these pressures, Scott and Rosa found their attraction growing stronger with each passing day. Late one night, as they pored over data from the latest sandworm experiment, Scott reached out and took Rosa's hand in his. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "whatever anyone thinks, I'm with you." Rosa's scales flushed with warmth as she leaned in closer, their foreheads touching in a gesture of deep affection. As the sandworm integration project progressed, an unexpected development arose. The creatures began to show signs of increased intelligence, solving complex problems, and adapting to new situations with surprising speed. During one experiment, a sandworm encountered an obstacle in its designated tunneling path. Instead of simply stopping or changing direction, it paused, assessed the situation, and then used its body to create a series of smaller tunnels around the obstacle, rejoining its original path on the other side. "This is unprecedented," Silana, the revived ancient Saurian, exclaimed as she reviewed the footage. "Their cognitive abilities have far exceeded their original programming." This discovery sparked heated debates among the research team. Questions of ethics and control became paramount as they grappled with the implications of their work. Meanwhile, far beyond the reaches of their solar system, the signal from the ancient beacon continued its journey through space. Unbeknownst to Scott, Rosa, and their team, it had caught the attention of an advanced civilization light years away. On a distant world, alien eyes watched with growing interest as the signal's data revealed the reactivation of long-dormant Saurian technology. Plans were set in motion, an expedition prepared. The universe was about to become a much smaller place. Back on the Saurian homeworld, the success of the Sandworm project was transforming the planet. Vast stretches of desert were being reclaimed, turned into habitable land through the controlled efforts of the sandworms. New settlements sprang up, and with them came a flood of technological advancements. As Scott and Rosa oversaw the construction of a new city rising from the sands, they received an urgent message from the research team still working in the ancient underground complex. "You need to see this," the holographic image of a human scientist said, her eyes wide with excitement. "We've found something in the old databanks, something about interstellar travel." Scott and Rosa exchanged a look of wonder and trepidation. The implications of such a discovery were staggering. As they prepared to delve into this new mystery, neither of them could have imagined the cosmic forces their actions had set in motion, or the challenges that lay ahead as they stood on the brink of a new age of exploration. Interstellar travel. Scott and Rosa's excitement was short-lived. As they prepared to depart for the ancient underground complex, alarms blared across the city. The night sky lit up with an otherworldly glow, drawing their eyes upward. "What in the world?" Scott breathed, squinting at the radiant object descending through the atmosphere. Rosa's scales rippled with tension. "That's no meteor." Within minutes, their comm devices erupted with urgent messages. The joint human-Saurian government was calling an emergency session. As they raced towards the Capitol building, reports flooded in of a massive alien spacecraft entering orbit around the Saurian homeworld. The council chamber was in chaos when they arrived. Representatives from both species argued loudly, their voices tinged with fear and confusion. Scott and Rosa pushed their way to the front, where a holographic display showed the alien vessel in stunning detail. Its sleek, organic shape defied conventional design, shimmering with an iridescent glow that seemed to pulse with life. As they watched, a smaller craft detached from the main ship and began its descent towards the planet's surface. "We're receiving a transmission," announced a communications officer, her voice cutting through the din. "They're calling themselves the Zephyrians." The room fell silent as the message played. A melodic voice, neither male nor female, filled the air. "Greetings, children of Earth and Saurus. We come in peace, drawn by the beacon of your ancestors. We are the Zephyrians, once allies of the ancient Saurians. We offer friendship and knowledge to your united worlds." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, as if a dam had broken, the room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Some called for immediate military action, while others argued for peaceful contact. Amidst the chaos, a senior official approached Scott and Rosa. "We need you two to act as our primary liaisons," he said urgently. "Your knowledge of the ancient tech makes you our best chance at understanding these Zephyrians." Before they could protest, they found themselves whisked away to a secure facility. There they were briefed on the situation and prepared for first contact. Hours passed in a blur of activity, until finally they stood at the designated landing site, hearts pounding as the Zephyrian shuttle touched down. The craft's hull seemed to ripple in part, revealing a tall, ethereal being. Ambassador Lyra, as she introduced herself, stood nearly 8 feet tall. Her skin was translucent, shimmering with an inner light that pulsed in time with her movements. When she spoke, her voice resonated directly in their minds. "Scott, Rosa, your names echo across the stars." Lyra's thoughts washed over them. "We have much to discuss." The next few days were a whirlwind of negotiations and revelations. The Zephyrians shared tales of their ancient alliance with the Saurians, of technologies and resources exchanged. They offered to help unlock more secrets of the ancient city and expand the fledgling interstellar program. But their offer came with a price: access to the sandworm control systems. This proposal sent shockwaves through the human-Saurian alliance. Some saw it as a fast track to galactic prominence, while others feared it would lead to Zephyrian dominance. Scott and Rosa found themselves at the center of this diplomatic storm, struggling to balance the interests of 3 species while navigating their own deepening relationship. Late one night, after a particularly grueling negotiation session, they sought solace in each other's arms. "What are we going to do?" Rosa whispered, her scales cool against Scott's skin. He held her tighter, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "I don't know, but whatever happens, we face it together." Their moment of intimacy was cut short by an urgent message. The Zephyrians were requesting a demonstration of their technology. Reluctantly, they made their way to the designated site, a barren stretch of Saurian desert. Ambassador Lyra stood at the center of a complex array of devices. With a gesture, she activated the system. The air shimmered and distorted, and before their eyes, the landscape began to transform. Barren dunes gave way to lush vegetation, crystal-clear streams cutting through newly formed valleys. "Incredible," Scott breathed, awe and unease warring within him. As the Zephyrians continued to showcase their power, Zelena pulled Scott and Rosa aside. Her eyes were wide with recognition and fear. "I remember now," she hissed. "The symbols, the technology. There's more to the Zephyrians than they're telling us. They played a role in our civilization's downfall." This revelation added yet another layer of complexity to the already tense situation. Scott and Rosa exchanged a glance, knowing they needed to act. In a bold move, they proposed a joint mission to a nearby star system, using a combination of human, Saurian, and Zephyrian technology. The proposal was met with cautious acceptance from all parties. As preparations for the mission began, Scott and Rosa worked closely with Ambassador Lyra to integrate Zephyrian tech with their existing systems. During this process, they made a startling discovery. The Zephyrians possessed a unique biological adaptation, allowing them to survive in the vacuum of space without protective suits. This revelation opened up new possibilities for space exploration, but also raised questions about the true nature of their new allies. As the launch date approached, Scott and Rosa found themselves grappling with the weight of their responsibilities and the potential consequences of their choices. Standing on the launch pad, watching the diverse crew of humans, Saurians, and Zephyrians board the ship, Scott turned to Rosa. "Ready to make history?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light despite the tension coiling in his gut. Rosa's tail twitched nervously, but her eyes were filled with perseverance. "Let's hope it's the right kind of history," she replied, taking his hand in hers as they walked towards their uncertain future among the stars. Stars. As they boarded the ship, a sense of anticipation and trepidation filled the air. The diverse crew settled into their positions, and with a thunderous roar, the vessel lifted off, carrying the hopes and fears of 3 species into the unknown. Their journey through the cosmos was uneventful at first, allowing the crew to acclimate to the close quarters and each other's presence. Scott and Rosa spent their time familiarizing themselves with the Zephyrian technology integrated into the ship's systems, marveling at its elegance and efficiency. Days turned into weeks as they approached their destination, a previously unexplored planet that showed promising signs of ancient civilization. As they entered the planet's orbit, the crew's excitement reached a fever pitch. "Initiating landing sequence," Scott announced, his hands dancing across the control panel. Rosa stood beside him, her scales shimmering with anticipation. The ship descended through the atmosphere, revealing a landscape of towering crystalline structures and winding metallic rivers. As they touched down on the alien surface, Ambassador Lyra's thoughts resonated through their minds. "Remember, we are here as explorers and diplomats. Proceed with caution." The expedition team, led by Scott and Rosa, ventured out onto the planet's surface. They made their way through the alien terrain, their sensors picking up faint energy signatures emanating from a nearby structure. As they approached, the ground beneath them began to shift. A section of the metallic surface retracted, revealing a hidden entrance. Scott exchanged a glance with Rosa before addressing the team. "Let's proceed carefully. We don't know what we might find down there." They descended into the depths of the planet, the air growing thick with ancient dust. Their lights illuminated intricate patterns, etched into the walls, depicting scenes of a long-lost civilization. At the heart of the underground complex, they discovered a chamber unlike anything they had ever seen. At its center stood a pulsating artifact, its surface covered in swirling patterns that seemed to move of their own accord. "Incredible," Rosa breathed, her tail twitching with excitement. "The energy readings from this artifact are off the charts." As they studied the artifact, tension began to build within the team. Ambassador Lyra's interest in the object was palpable, her translucent form glowing more intensely as she approached it. "We should take this back to our ship for further study," Lyra suggested, her thoughts carrying an undercurrent of urgency. Scott and Rosa exchanged a worried look. They had discussed this possibility before the mission and had agreed on a course of action. "Ambassador," Scott said carefully, "we believe it would be best if we secure the artifact on our ship for joint study by all 3 species. Its power and potential make it too important to be claimed by any one group." Lyra's form flickered, her thoughts projecting a mix of disappointment and frustration. "I must object. The Zephyrians have the most advanced technology, and are best equipped to study such an artifact. Rosa stepped forward, her voice firm. We understand your position, Ambassador, but our decision stands. This discovery belongs to all of us. The tension in the air was palpable as they carefully extracted the artifact and transported it back to the ship. As they secured it in a specially designed containment unit, Scott couldn't shake the feeling that they had set something significant in motion. Their caution proved warranted when, as they prepared for their return journey, the artifact suddenly pulsed with energy. Alarms blared throughout the ship as systems began to malfunction. "What's happening?" Scott shouted over the chaos, his hands flying over the controls. Rosa's eyes widened as she monitored the readings. The artifact is emitting some kind of energy pulse. It's affecting our systems and the crew. Around them, the effects of the pulse became evident. Human crew members stumbled, overwhelmed by suddenly heightened senses. Saurians found their natural abilities amplified, their movements faster and more precise. The Zephyrians, including Ambassador Lyra, fell into a trance-like state, their forms pulsing in rhythm with the artifact. Scott and Rosa locked eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. They had to act fast to contain the situation and stabilize the ship. "I'll try to isolate the artifact's energy signature," Rosa said, her claws flying over the console. "You focus on keeping us in orbit." Scott nodded, gritting his teeth as he fought against the ship's malfunctioning systems. Their intimate bond, forged through shared experiences and the neural interface, allowed them to work in perfect synchronization. As they struggled to regain control, a new threat emerged. The ship's sensors picked up a massive energy surge from the planet's surface. "Scott, look!" Rosa called out, pointing to the view screen. They watched in awe and horror as a colossal structure rose from beneath the planet's crust. Its biomechanical form pulsed with ancient power, unfurling like a giant flower opening to the sun. "It's some kind of defense system," Scott realized, his mind racing. "And I think we just triggered it." The ancient defense system, awakened by the artifact's energy pulse, turned its attention to the ship. Energy beams lanced out from its surface, narrowly missing the vessel. "Evasive maneuvers," Scott called out, his hands dancing across the controls. The ship lurched, barely avoiding another blast. As they fought to keep the ship intact, Scott's mind raced through their options. Suddenly, an idea struck him. A dangerous, potentially brilliant idea. "Rosa," he said, turning to her with perseverance in his eyes, "the sandworms. We can use them." Understanding dawned on her face. "The reprogrammed sandworms we brought for terraforming? But how?" "If you can interface with their control systems, we can direct them to burrow into the planet's crust," Scott explained quickly. "They could disrupt the defense system's power sources." Rosa nodded, her scales rippling with nervous energy. "It's risky, but it might be our only chance." As Rosa connected to the sandworm control systems, Scott coordinated the ship's defenses. The massive creatures were deployed, burrowing deep into the planet's surface with incredible speed. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The ground around the defense system began to collapse, its energy beams flickering and faltering. But their victory was short-lived as the planet itself began to destabilize, massive quakes shaking its surface. In the midst of the chaos, Ambassador Lyra suddenly emerged from her trance, her form glowing with newfound intensity. "Scott, Rosa," her thoughts resonated urgently in their minds. "I have seen the truth. Our ancestors. The memories. I know how to stop this." The ambassador's revelation set the stage for a daring plan. As the battle raged on the planet's surface, a small team prepared to embark on a mission that would determine the fate of their expedition and potentially reshape the future of their alliance. And potentially reshape the future of their species. Scott and Rosa exchanged a quick glance, their enhanced bond allowing them to communicate volumes without words. They nodded in unison, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Ambassador," Scott said, turning to Lyra, "we're listening. What do you know?" As Lyra began to explain, the ship shuddered violently. The artifact's energy pulse intensified, bathing the crew in an otherworldly glow. Scott felt a surge of strength course through his body, while Rosa's horns began to elongate and change shape before his eyes. Even Lyra's ethereal form seemed to solidify, becoming more tangible. The artifact, Lyra's thoughts resonated in their minds, clearer than ever before. It's not just a relic. It's a key to a vast interstellar communication network. Our ancestors, they were part of something greater. As the energy surge subsided, the crew found themselves changed. Humans stood taller, their muscles more defined. Saurians' scales shimmered with newfound vibrancy, their natural abilities amplified. The Zephyrians, once translucent, now possessed solid forms that pulsed with energy. "We need to get this information back to our research team," Rosa said, her tail swishing with newfound agility. "This changes everything." Months passed as the joint research team, led by Scott, Rosa, and Ambassador Lyra, studied the artifact in a specialized facility on the Saurian homeworld. Their enhanced abilities proved invaluable, allowing them to make unprecedented progress in understanding the ancient technology. One evening, as Scott and Rosa worked late in the lab, their heightened connection led to a breakthrough. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same control panel, and suddenly, the artifact hummed to life. "Scott, look!" Rosa exclaimed, her scales rippling with excitement. "The energy patterns, they're forming a coherent signal." As they watched in awe, the artifact projected a holographic star map, pinpointing locations across the galaxy. One point pulsed urgently, emitting a distinct signal. "It's a distress call," Scott realized, his enhanced mind quickly processing the data. "From a species we've never encountered before." The discovery sent shockwaves through the Alliance. Debates raged about how to respond. Some argued for caution, fearing the attention of potentially hostile advanced civilizations. Others saw it as a chance to establish themselves as a benevolent force in the galaxy. In the midst of the political turmoil, Scott and Rosa found themselves drawn closer together. Their enhanced physiology and mental connection intensified their already strong attraction. One night, in a secluded corner of the research facility, they gave in to their desires. Scott marveled at the feel of Rosa's scales against his skin, smoother and warmer than before. Rosa's tail wrapped around his leg, pulling him closer. Their enhanced senses made every touch, every caress, more intense than they had ever experienced. As they lay together afterward, catching their breath, Scott whispered, "I never imagined it could be like this." Rosa nuzzled against him, her horn gently grazing his cheek. "Our bodies, our minds, it's like we were made for each other." Their intimate moment was interrupted by an urgent comm signal. The Alliance had made its decision. They would respond to the distress call. Preparations for the rescue mission moved quickly. Scott and Rosa were chosen to lead the expedition, given their experience and enhanced abilities. Ambassador Lyra joined as the Zephyrian representative, her new solid form allowing her to fully participate in the mission. As they boarded the ship, Scott couldn't help but notice the way Lyra's gaze lingered on him and Rosa. Her newly expressive face betrayed a mix of curiosity and something else. Was it longing? The journey to the Valorian homeworld was fraught with challenges. Navigating unfamiliar star systems pushed their piloting skills to the limit. Encounters with strange spatial phenomena tested the ship's defenses and the crew's persistence. Throughout it all, Scott and Rosa's bond grew stronger. Their ability to work in perfect synchronization amazed the rest of the crew. During quiet moments, they explored their new physical forms, each encounter more intense and intimate than the last. As they approached the Valorian system, the ship's sensors detected an immense gravitational disturbance. On the main view screen, they saw a swirling vortex of energy, warping the very fabric of space-time around it. "That's no natural phenomenon," Rosa said, her enhanced vision picking up details others missed. "It's artificial. Someone built that thing." Scott nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. "Whatever it is, it's tearing this system apart. We need to act fast if we're going to save the Valorians." As they prepared for the landing party, Scott and Rosa donned their space suits, customized to accommodate their changed physiology. They stood at the airlock, ready to make first contact with a desperate alien species while facing an incomprehensible threat. Scott turned to Rosa, their eyes meeting through their helmet visors. No words were needed. Their enhanced bond conveyed all the love, willpower, and readiness for whatever lay ahead. The airlock hissed open, revealing the alien landscape of the Valorian homeworld. As Scott took his first step onto the planet's surface, he knew that this moment would change the course of galactic history. Whatever challenges awaited them, he was grateful to face them with Rosa by his side. With a nod to Rosa, he stepped forward, leading the landing party onto the alien world. The sight that greeted them was nothing short of breathtaking. Crystalline structures covered the planet's surface, pulsing with an otherworldly energy that seemed to react to the looming space-time anomaly above. The structures ranged from small, delicate formations to towering spires that reached toward the turbulent sky. As they ventured further, Scott's enhanced vision picked up movement in the distance. "Contact," he said quietly, alerting the team. From behind a cluster of crystal formations emerged the Valorians. Their bioluminescent bodies glowed softly, casting an eerie light on the surrounding crystals. Multiple limbs moved with fluid grace as they approached, their movements a strange dance that seemed both alien and eerily familiar. Scott felt Rosa tense beside him, her tail twitching with nervous energy. He reached out and squeezed her hand, their enhanced connection allowing him to project calm reassurance. The lead Valorian stepped forward, its body pulsing with what Scott interpreted as a mixture of hope and trepidation. It extended two of its upper limbs in a gesture that seemed unmistakably like a greeting. Scott mirrored the gesture, his enhanced mind quickly adapting to the alien body language. "We come in peace," he said, his voice steady and clear. "We received your distress call, and we're here to help." Rosa stepped forward, her newly elongated horns catching the light of the Valorian's bioluminescence. The alien's eyes widened, focusing on her horns with evident fascination. To everyone's surprise, Rosa's horns began to glow faintly, resonating with the energy of the surrounding crystals. The lead Valorian's body flashed with patterns of light, communicating excitement to its companions. "Scott," Rosa whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I can feel the energy. It's incredible." As Rosa's connection to the planet's energy grid became apparent, the Valorians grew more animated. They guided the landing party to a structure that appeared to be a command center, its walls lined with pulsing crystals that mirrored the patterns of the anomaly above. Inside, the Valorian leaders quickly established a rapport with Scott and Rosa, their enhanced abilities allowing for rapid communication and understanding. Through a combination of gestures, light patterns, and intuitive leaps, they learned the truth behind the anomaly. "It's not a natural phenomenon," Scott explained to the team, his mind racing with the implications. "The Valorians created it, an experiment in perpetual energy that went horribly wrong." Rosa nodded, her horns glowing brighter as she processed the information. "They've lost the technological knowledge to control it. Over millennia, their civilization regressed, leaving them unable to shut down their own creation." As they discussed potential solutions, Rosa's horns began to pulse more intensely. She gasped, her eyes widening with sudden understanding. "Scott, I think I can interface with the anomaly. My horns, they're channeling the energy somehow." Scott's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Rosa, no, it's too dangerous. We don't know what that kind of power could do to you." Rosa's eyes met his, filled with willpower. "It might be our only chance to save the Valorians. We have to try." As the tension in the room mounted, Scott found himself grasping for a way to lighten the mood. Without thinking, he blurted out, "Well, you certainly look horny enough to handle it." The moment the words left his mouth, he realized his mistake. Rosa's eyes widened in shock, her scales flushing a deep crimson. The Valorians, unfamiliar with human idioms, looked utterly baffled by the exchange. I mean, Scott stammered, his face burning with embarrassment. He launched into a fumbling explanation of the double meaning, his words tripping over each other as he tried to clarify the misunderstanding. To his surprise and relief, the Valorians' bodies began to pulse with patterns that he recognized as amusement. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a sense of camaraderie born from this moment of cross-cultural confusion. With the mood lightened, the team refocused on the task at hand. They devised a plan that would utilize the artifact they had brought from home to amplify Rosa's connection to the planet's energy grid. This would allow her to directly interface with the anomaly, while Scott and Lyra would use their enhanced physical abilities to protect her during the dangerous process. As they prepared to put their plan into action, Scott pulled Rosa aside. He cupped her face in his hands, their enhanced connection allowing him to convey volumes without words. "Be careful," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. Rosa smiled, her horns glowing softly between them. "Always," she replied, sealing the promise with a quick kiss. With a deep breath, they turned to face the challenge ahead, ready to risk everything to save a world they had only just discovered. The fate of the Valorians, and perhaps the future of galactic diplomacy, rested on their shoulders as they stepped out into the crystal-covered landscape, the anomaly looming ominously above.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.